How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking with Dan Eisenhart. If I say his last name correctly, forgot to ask. He is the founder and CEO of Form Swim Goggles. I'm sure that most of you have heard of their product. I use it constantly, and I'm not just saying that. Been using it before I even knew Dan. I got to be a part of their beta program for the new Smart Swim 2 goggles. Those are awesome. Lots of cool things. Anyway, we talked to Dan about his entire journey from as a young kid and the things that he learned, and then growing up to becoming engineer, to finding entrepreneurship. We talk about marriage and family, so many things. It is a really enriching conversation, and I learned actually quite a few things. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dan Eisenhart. Really quick before we get back to the show, just wanted to say that we have episode 100 coming up. I can't even believe that. And we are going to do things a little bit different for that episode. I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to interview me and ask me some questions. So if you have some questions you would be interested in asking, you can check the show notes link in the description. It will take you to a Google form where you can add any and all and as many questions as you would like to. I will compile a list and hopefully go through as many of those questions as I can for that episode. So if you're interested in that, check out the link. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy today's show. So I am about an hour north of Knoxville, Tennessee. I don't know if you're familiar with that area. But
I'm familiar with Tennessee. I was there many, many years ago during Christmas break. I think it was 1995.
Yeah.
So yeah, but not. I haven't been to Knoxville.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. We're living with my my in-laws, my wife's parents, for the next few days. We've been here for the past few months in transition, getting ready to move to California. So it's been good getting to stay with them. We haven't had this much time with them since the COVID era, so it's been nice to relax a little bit.
I haven't heard that reference in a while, which is nice. Nobody talks about COVID anymore, but that was a special time.
Yeah, where are you at right now?
So Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Okay.
So that's where I live now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I was actually up there back in, oh man, was the last time I was there? In May. Are you familiar with Hope, BC? Like, I guess up there, Fraser Valley? Yeah, so we have some friends. They run a retreat center up there. I get to go visit, but what a beautiful area. I love the mountains and the snowy peaks in the mornings. Absolutely gorgeous area. It's a lot different here than the east of the U.S., obviously. It's a much different scale.
Yeah. No, it's great. I don't know if you are an 80s film buff, but you heard the Rambo movies.
Yeah.
I think the first one was actually filmed out there.
Yeah.
I think in the trees, the forest there behind Hope.
Yeah, for sure. I have heard of that. I've seen a little bit of the Rambo series, but I tend to be more of a new movies guy. I'm a buff for the CGI, the cool looking stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. No. If you going back and rewatching the 80s movies, it's not a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's more the nostalgia.
Yeah, it's a different feel. My wife's family, actually, they're really into like the older 50s and 60s movies, and I was like totally against that, but they've over time gotten me a little more used to it. And there's something to be appreciated. I think acting was a lot different back then, and just the types of entertainment it was less of like the shock and awe factor and all that stuff like that. A little bit more thoughtful in some ways, I think.
Yeah, more dialogue, not so much effects and flashy camera stunts.
Yeah. So how long have you been in BC, like Vancouver? Is that where you grew up?
I actually grew up in Denmark.
Okay,
so
nice.
That's where I was born. Spent most of my time until I was in my, I guess, early 30s. I went to different countries in my 20s as well. So traveled quite a bit, but grew up there, and then ultimately ended up in Vancouver.
Yeah, for sure. Do you ever go back to Denmark?
I go back at least, I would say at least once a year.
Yeah.
And my parents are still there. My brother lives in the US, but
Okay.
I have lots of friends and my parents are still there. So either Christmas or summer or both, we'll go the whole family back.
Oh, really?
To Denmark.
That's awesome. Do you obviously speak Danish then?
Yeah, that's my first language.
Oh, really? That's so cool. So my wife's family, they're all Danish.
No way.
Yeah, so they went back on a Europe trip to go visit all of their Danish family and the old grandparents' farms and stuff like that. I can't tell you exactly where. I have not been. I wasn't married into the family at that point, so I didn't get the free ticket to go to visit. But yeah, it's definitely a pride thing. Like there's little Danish flags all around the house and little pieces of decor and stuff like that. But it looks like a gorgeous place.
I wasn't really much into that, but I still, when you have kids, you obviously want to expose them
Yeah.
as well to their heritage, and they quite enjoy it. So, yeah, that's a big part of also why we go back so much, for them to be able to experience that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it looks like a gorgeous area. Did you live like near the coast? I guess Denmark is sort of
I guess in
coastal
Denmark,
in
you're
general.
always living near the coast,
Yeah.
in at least in Canadian terms, because
Yep.
Canada is such a huge country. But yeah, it was probably 20, 30 kilometers from the
Yeah.
coast, but it was in on the mainland. So this sort of
Oh,
the peninsula, which is, I guess, is where the biggest landmass is, and then you've got, Copenhagen,
hmm.
on the island, on Sealand. So
Yeah.
I'm from Aalborg, from the mainland.
Okay, nice. So your kids, are they speaking Danish as well? Are they learning Danish?
They're learning slowly. It's not a language that's terribly useful out there in the world, so they should probably
Hmm.
learn Chinese or Spanish instead.
Yeah.
But they are interested, and I think that has to drive any kind of learning. You have to be interested in it first. So they
Yeah.
do know some words. I do think they eventually will probably pick up enough words to be able to hold a conversation. But for now, it's all English. The Danish people, as you know, they all speak
Hmm.
English.
Yeah.
So we learned that only 5 million people in the world speak our language.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to learn a second language.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I guess first things first, just want to say thank you so much for making the time. I know you're obviously a busy guy. I was doing a little bit of research on the things that you do according to the LinkedIn and any article I could find, and it seems like you stay pretty busy. So first of all, thank you so much for making the time. It's a great honor of mine.
Thanks for having me. It's my
Yeah.
pleasure.
So the first question I would love to open up with is one that I think is becoming a bit of a brand for the show, but I would love to know from your perspective, who is Dan?
Who's Dan? Well, um, I'm definitely an entrepreneur, something I learned late in life. I would still define myself as an athlete, even though I haven't really competed since 2019, and I
Hmm.
don't really compete in swimming anymore. But I do consider myself an athlete. I still train like a triathlete, and
Yeah.
an elite triathlete, but I still run, bike, and swim.
Hmm.
And I guess I'm a pretty curious person. Like I really love taking on challenges and trying something new and learning,
Yeah.
pushing the envelope. So I think those will probably be the best
Okay.
ways to describe who I am.
Yeah. So, entrepreneur, you said that came late in life. I am of the belief, I think that like the spirit of entrepreneurship is, I mean, it can be learned, but I find that often, like, especially serial entrepreneurs, it's something that like comes from a very young age. Did you notice in yourself the entrepreneurial tendencies before that shift to where I guess you focused on entrepreneurship later in your life, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, it's a great question. Something I've thought about now, later in life. I definitely was always a risk taker. So I'm the youngest of two. My brother was probably not the biggest risk taker, but I always was sort of pushing the envelope and trying
Hmm.
new things, and I didn't really associate that with entrepreneurship at all at that time.
Yeah.
So growing up, I mean, I grew up in a family where like my parents weren't entrepreneurs. I didn't really know anybody who had
Mm.
started their own business,
Huh.
maybe with the exception of my granddad, who didn't really spend much time in school, and he ended up working himself up to being a business owner.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that wasn't top of my mind, and actually until much later when I did my MBA. That's really when I realized that, whoa, there's a whole world out there I didn't know about.
Yeah.
I should go and explore it.
What sparked the interest to go back and get your MBA and then obviously like starting something? Were there ideas that you had already, or why did you decide to go back?
I didn't actually have any ideas for a business. I was, I studied mechanical engineering, did my master's in sort of industrial engineering,
Hmm.
and went and worked as a consultant for, implementing SAP systems. So it
Okay.
sounds
Okay.
incredibly boring, and I wasn't very fulfilled with it. So I think, like many who do an MBA later in life, well, once you've had a little bit of work experience, it's often because you're not happy with your career and you want to take it in another direction. And I did
Hmm.
definitely didn't define myself as an engineer or as a IT consultant. And so I just thought, okay, let's just combine my need for adventure with also, a this ability to potentially carve a new career for myself. And so I applied for on the MBA program in Melbourne in Australia. I always wanted to go to Australia. That
Okay.
was something I found really exciting growing up in this country that was so far away, full
Mm-hmm.
of crazy poisonous animals and
Yeah, the
just
land
just
down under.
land down on. It's a very enigmatic place.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up going there in my early 30s for this MBA, full-time MBA. So I quit my job as a consultant and went down to travel around Australia for 6 months, Australia and New Zealand,
Oh wow.
and then ended up in Melbourne and started the program there.
Yeah.
That was really the turning point, I would say, for me.
Yeah. A turning point for like focusing on entrepreneurship and like that becoming more like a piece of your life, you mean?
Yeah, I think it was the first step was actually just reflecting on what I wanted and what I thought my strengths were and what made me
Mm.
happy. And I really hadn't thought too much about that before. I was just sort of going into engineering because I was, I liked building stuff and I did like engineering. I thought it was a really good program. I studied
Mm-hmm.
in my hometown there. But I didn't really have a vision for my future
Mm.
that aligned with my strengths as a
Yeah.
person. And I don't think I really saw my strengths until much later in life. So I think starting on the program and you start, that a lot of the MBA, at least in Melbourne, was about, finding out who you were and what
Yeah.
you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that happened, as well for me.
Yeah. Interesting. So it sounds like you got to this point in your life where obviously you weren't fulfilled with the work that you were doing with the consultancy and things like that. And it sounds like there's a level of self-awareness that started to grow. And you said something kind of interesting where, you lacked a vision for where you were kind of going in life. What
Yeah.
what drove you to make the decisions that you did prior to that in life? Like, so I'm thinking, you're growing up, did your parents guide you in a direction? And you said engineering. I mean, that's a safe job. How did you how did you guide or find guidance through life up to that point?
Yeah, it's funny because I come from a family of engineers. Like my dad's an engineer, my brother's an engineer. I think most of my uncles are engineers.
Mm,
So it was one of those things that, and the university in my hometown, that the engineering program is one of the best engineering programs in the country. So it was sort of just natural for me to go into that. And I
yeah.
did think, well, maybe I should do something different. But I think maybe I was a little bit immature when it came to that. I didn't really know what I wanted, and so I thought, well, I'll get into this, and then I can't go wrong with an
Hmm.
engineering degree, and so that was probably, to be honest, why I ended up studying engineering. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Kind of the safe move.
it was kind of the safe move, which kind of goes against my person because I am actually more of a risk taker.
Hmm.
And it's just that it was for lack of alternatives. I honestly just had no idea.
Yeah.
Also, because I was not exposed to an environment like I grew up, in the '80s in a small town with, where the like was known for shipbuilding, and
Hmm.
and then that whole industry collapsed or changed fundamentally, in the '70s and '80s, and everybody was sort of laid off. So it
Yeah.
was a miserable sort of '80s that I grew up in. There wasn't much inspiration for, hey, you can start a company and go and
Yeah.
fulfill your dreams that way. It was more like, well, it's either one degree or another degree, working for a corporate. And I was never, I never actually was excited about any of those things, but it was
Yeah.
still better than not having a job. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I saw it.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point of topic of conversation. I think that should probably be talked about more, and it's that younger kids, high school going into college, like you mentioned something about maturity, and you just didn't know like what you wanted to do, and then society kind of forces us. I think definitely in the U.S., it sounds like maybe even around the world, like in Europe, like oh, you got to figure out what where you're gonna do. But I feel like something needs to change, more apprenticeships or something, because like I guess that leads to the question is what was it that started to shine a light on you internally when you were like kind of looking over yourself to figure out like okay, like these are my skills and strengths. I like to take risk. Obviously I have an engineering background. I want that sense of adventure. What was it that started to give you that light to see like okay, maybe I need to figure out to go this different direction?
Yeah, I think maybe the first time I experienced something that resonated more deeply with me was actually doing the engineering program because in Aalborg, my hometown there,
Yeah.
back then it was very, I guess, atypical to have the project-based format where you were basically placed in a project group. Actually, you had to go and recruit your own members, and then
Oh well.
you got a room, and then you had all your own computers, and you were always working on a project. And the courses you took were supposed to feed into the project you were doing.
Hmm.
So it was very entrepreneurial. When I look back on that, it was very novel, and I remember feeling very connected to that compared to just sitting in lectures and listening to somebody, talking to the students. I
Yeah.
really was much more interested in, okay, I need this course because I need to apply it
Hmm.
to solve this problem in a project that is actually pretty cool. I'm doing in a group, teamwork with others. So that was probably the first time where I realized I really enjoy the process of working in a team and working on a difficult problem,
Yeah.
and then going and finding the tools that specifically apply to solving that problem instead of just sitting and listening to some course where I have no idea, no connection with the reality. Where is this going to be used? How is it going to be
Yeah.
applied? And then I sort of tune out. But I found that I wasn't tuning out
Hmm.
doing that program. So that was a really positive experience for me, and that was probably
Yeah.
the first time that I realized, okay, there's something that appeals to me and that I'm good at, but still I didn't really connect it with entrepreneurship at all at that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
stage.
Yeah. When did you first hear the word entrepreneurship?
It was actually pretty late in life. I would say it would have been probably the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think I ever heard. I mean, obviously, I grew up in Denmark, so it would have been. But even the Danish word is very close to the English word, and it wasn't something that I sort of heard very often,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
to be
Yeah. I
honest.
remember hearing the word for the first time a few times as a kid, and I was always like, I actually thought it was like an excuse to say that you're doing something without doing something. Like it was like a jobless job. That's like how I first took it. But then after like starting my own thing a few times and looking back in my past, I realized like, oh yeah, like entrepreneurship, like it's very much a character trait or a
It
set
is.
of character traits. Like, some people are athletes, they identify as athletes. Like I think entrepreneurship is definitely like a lifestyle, almost like a triathlete or something like that.
Yeah, no, it totally is, and it's once you venture into that world, then you sort of connect the dots and you realize, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this trait is totally something I've always had, and that's something that you see in most people that are entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah. Yeah, hindsight's 2020. So for your
Yeah.
family, like your mom and your dad, and did they help fund your like journey into education to go to the engineering degree?
So I was very fortunate that in Denmark and most of Scandinavia, education is free, like,
That's
because
nice.
the taxes are very high.
Okay.
So means that most people go, yeah, a lot of people get the opportunity to go to university without having to save up. So
Yeah.
it's already part of it. So that meant, you could go and do your master's degree, and you didn't really need your family
Yeah.
to back you. I think my parents paid for the books because you still have to pay for that yourself. So that was
Okay.
great. So they knew that I had to give them the receipt before they would give me the money. So
Nice.
that was very smart of them. And then you even get a stipend from the Danish government, so you could go and live in an apartment. And that's actually what I did. I didn't stay at home. I just left and went and lived downtown in an apartment, and that was possible through the stipend. So
Yeah.
so yeah, that was never a problem. It wasn't until the MBA where that was a costly affair that suddenly I had to save up.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I saved up to pay for that, and then ended up getting scholarships. So it was actually nice to have a bit of spending money that I could use for travels instead.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Especially in those parts of the world. New Zealand. I'm going
Yeah.
to New Zealand for the first time in December, and then I haven't been to
Oh,
Australia,
nice.
but yeah,
Well,
looking.
where are you going in New Zealand?
So the World Championship or 70.3 World Champs, we're going to Taupo for the race, and then
Okay.
my family. It's going to be like our last big family vacation because my wife and I are the oldest, kind of in the family of cousins, and people getting married, and there's kids are going to probably be starting to happen soon. So we're going to make this one
Yeah.
big family hurrah. So we're going to get there December
That's
9
great.
and then come back January 1st, and we're going to try to do the tour of the whole island. So it's going to be jam packed, but super fun and probably
Make
exhausting.
that sounds amazing. Make sure that you go out to Napier. which
Napier.
is
I gotta write this down.
Napier, Napier, which is, I believe, yeah, it's at the easternmost point in the North Island, and
Okay.
it's just this. I think there's an earthquake that leveled the place in 1931. So
Oh, really?
but that was just when the Art Deco architecture sort of design was hyped, and so everything is Art Deco there. So it's like the most well preserved, comprehensive Art Deco city
Wow.
uh, on the Pacific. There, that was amazing.
I
So
have
yeah,
no idea what Art Deco is. Can you educate me?
so Art Deco is a style of architecture. I believe it came about
I gotta Google it.
around the time when Tutankhamun's grave was dug up in the pyramid there in the early 20s or so, sometime in the 20s.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then they saw all these hieroglyphs and all these strange artistic expressions on the walls there and in the crypt, and then that became an influence for a lot of architects and designers at the time, because that was a huge piece of news that suddenly
Yeah,
you had an insight into this old king
yeah,
in
yeah.
Egypt.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so beautiful. I'm Googling pictures of it. Now I have like an idea. Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah, I'm sure
absolutely
you've seen it
gorgeous.
before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for
So,
sure.
so like Miami, you've got a lot of buildings in Miami as well that are
Hmm.
Art Deco.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Neat, neat. I'll have to check it out. Napier. Sweet. Um, so going back to like your family dynamic, I'm curious to know because you said you come from a family who entrepreneurship wasn't a thing, kind of engineering, we go to work, like we kind of do that thing. Obviously, you live a much different lifestyle. How do you feel like is your dad, your mom proud of you and were they supportive throughout this shift and move into this direction?
They were always very supportive. I would say the first time I actually sort of took a time out was earlier than that. Was after high school. I ended up doing 2 years off
Oh, wow.
because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it's perfectly normal. At least it was back then to take 1 year off, and that was fine. I went to London. My mom is actually English; she's from London, so
Oh, okay.
that was fine. I moved over there, worked in a bar for a year. But when I came back and said I'm going to take another year off, then they were sort of okay. Maybe you should go to
Figure something
college.
out. Yeah.
But I ended up going actually to the U.S. and I ended up being accepted in a swim program in the U.S. and swam there, and also was in college. So
Oh,
I
wow.
kind of did go to college then. But yeah, so that was the only time when they were a little bit hesitant. But after that, yeah, they were always supportive and thought that sounded like a fantastic idea
Yeah.
to go and explore that avenue.
Yeah.
So I'm
Who
very
do you,
thankful for that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Who do you think that you share more character traits with, your mom or your dad?
It's funny. It's almost a 50-50. I would say. My dad's the archetypical engineer, so
Hmm.
I've got sort of my logical thinking
Yeah.
from him, and then I've got my mom is more of an ideas person and sort of very creative, uh, optimistic. Um, she was also a traveler. She loved traveling. So I think those things I also have.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. I can sort of, when I'm in a certain mode, I can see, okay, this is kind of my dad's traits. And then in another mode, I'm like, oh, this is totally my mom.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's a bit of both,
Yeah. Yeah.
depending on the context.
Did they, or in the context of swimming, because you competitively swam for 14 years, did they have a hand in introducing you to the water for the first time?
So that was my dad. So my dad was a swimmer.
Okay.
Um, his dad, was a swimmer. He actually found out he was a swimmer after winning a river crossing in my hometown in the 20s. And then
Wow.
suddenly everybody became swimmers in the family. My dad and his two brothers and all the kids of, my dad's brother, including my own brother too. So it's kind of swimming and engineering,
Yeah.
were the two constants. But yeah, so I was sort of thrown in the pool in the deep end at probably 5, I would say. And then um, went on a team shortly thereafter,
Wow.
and then was swimming in a team all the way, up through my childhood into my 20s.
Yeah. Was it something more that you fell in love with and you wanted to do, or in the beginning was it more of, all right, Dan, time to go to swim practice, and you were more or less pushed into it?
All kids love water. It's one of those things that, we lose over time. It's a life
Hmm.
skill.
Hmm.
So it is one of those things that, it's hard to come back into the pool, you hear that from many grown-ups. You can jump on a bike, you can go run, but swimming is different. So you get a little bit afraid of the water as you get older. But back then, of course, I loved jumping in the pool, and it was also great to compete when I got into that, and then the camaraderie. I was always attracted to the individual sports, so I wasn't very good at team sports. And even though in my work, that's kind of what I love is doing, work in teams. But when it came to sport, I wasn't like, I played soccer for some years and tried handball, which is a Danish sport. Maybe you don't know it.
Yeah, I have seen it. I've
But
seen it.
yeah, so I would just know I was not very good at it. But I really loved I loved the honesty in swimming, where all you had to do is you were measured by the hundredths of a second, and there was no like, oh, okay, well, the referee like treated me wrong, or this player didn't pass the ball to me at the right time. It's just like, it's such an honest sport. It's just, you can see the results in the time. That appealed to me a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it makes me think of you when you mentioned hundredths of a second. There's an old sketch or comedy bit done by Jerry Seinfeld about Olympic runners. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know Seinfeld. I'm not sure I remember
So he does
Olympic
this sketch where
reference.
he basically turns sideways and he's like, three of the best runners in the world separated by hundredths of a second, and he turns sideways and he's like, first place, and then never heard of him. And so you're
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. Yes. That
And
was pretty good. Well done. You got a career in comedy.
It's super funny because it's so true. But I mean, it's a beautiful thing to celebrate athletic achievements, and everybody wants to be first place, and second place is okay, and third, whatever, and then fourth, obviously, never heard of them. But I always struggle because you have with the Olympic trials, and then obviously the Olympic Games, you have these swimmers, like you're saying. I mean, I've seen actually a couple of ties that happened in Paris, and it's just like, the turmoil that can play on someone's life, because especially for professional athletes, because their entire identity, not everyone, but most of them are like, their entire identity is like wrapped up in this sport, and it's everything that they do, and then they just, for all intents and purposes, they are the same as the guy who got first, just down the line, just barely. And so I was like, man, how do you deal with that? How do you prepare athletes to be okay with not necessarily being 1/100th or 1/1000th of a second ahead or behind?
Yeah. No, I totally get that, and that's obviously one of the challenges of the sport. You also have a lot of races where everybody comes in at different times. Sometimes it's multiple seconds, and that's a lot in swimming. And then you have sports like gymnastics where you rely on referees to agree, and then you get an average score. And is that fair, right?
Yeah,
And sometimes
seriously.
you get the same score. So yeah, I think that's part of the sport, but it's also what makes it fascinating, I think, to watch. Right,
Yeah.
when you see some like a Phelps tapping everybody out by 100ths of a second because he kept his head down in the last stroke and his goggles fell off at the 75-meter mark, but he's trained swimming without goggles, and those are just those are magical moments in sport.
Yeah, they really are. So what made you give up swimming?
So I think, what made me give up swimming, sort of two parts. One was I was pretty fatigued coming back from, I swam in the US there before I started my engineering studies in Denmark. I took those 2 years off. And that was, training twice a day. Back then, it was actually not normal to train twice a day in Denmark. It was two practices a week. We would have a morning training as well. And then in the US, it's like basically every day, maybe except Sunday, you've got two practices. So I was a long distance swimmer, 1500 meter and 400 meters. I was training the most meters, on the squad alongside the other, distance swimmers. And so it's just a lot of training. And at that time, I was 22 when I came back. I'd been swimming, basically nonstop since I was 5. And the 5, 6, 7 years before that, swimming at least a high level in Denmark. And so I was a bit fatigued. And then on top of that, it was very difficult for me to continue to swim at a high level and also do my engineering degree, because the engineering degree is, I think, in most universities in the world, is very challenging, right? Because there's just, like most degrees, like if you really, have to, even doing half of the studies, the home study and the project work and exams and everything, there's not much time left over for anything else. And if you're constantly fatigued, then and it's quite involved to train twice a day and also prepare for competitions and travel. I just thought I couldn't do swimming well and I couldn't do engineering well, so I had to pick.
Mm.
And so that was actually an easy pick. But I continued to swim
Okay.
just on the masters team, just 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
But yes, that was probably, those were the two factors.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about like for engineering and swimming, it's easy for you to make the choice. I don't know if it would be the same for everybody, obviously, just based on what their dreams and aspirations are. But did you have any aspiration to go and be an Olympic level swimmer, or was that just something that wasn't as much in the cards for you?
Do you know what? You learn very early on whether you're at Olympic level or not. I knew I wasn't at Olympic level, right? I mean
Mm.
that's one of those things that it will not come as a surprise that suddenly, oh, I could, do Olympics in your mid 20s, right? So I think, and in many ways I was never really, that was not the goal for me. I really wanted to continue to improve. I loved the camaraderie on the team. I loved being in shape. I loved racing, and so that was kind of the end of it. And so that also made it easier for me. I didn't have that. I had a little bit of the blues, obviously, when you stop having those endorphins in
Sure.
your system all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to only training 3 times a week. That certainly had an effect. But I was also at peace with it. So I definitely wasn't like, oh, I would love to go back and swim at that level again. That was kind of a
Yeah.
chapter that was done. And I still, to this day, have my friends from back then, from where I've swum both in the US and Denmark, which
Mm.
is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And we all have the same sort of opinion about this. That was a chapter. It was fantastic to be part of it,
Yeah.
but there's a time and a place for it.
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting. I wouldn't say that most people share your ability to close a chapter and move on with such peace or just intentionality. I think that's a hard, I don't know if it's nature or nurture, maybe you can answer that, but like that skill of being able to close one door, be at peace with it and move to the next, I think is not something that a lot of people have. Is that something for you that came easy, or is this like a skill that you've worked on over time?
I mean, and maybe it wasn't easy, because certainly it's a big change from going, you from a constant in your life where when you have to train, you have a coach telling you what to do, and like I said, you've got those endorphins and you get addicted to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if I had had another sport that I would have gotten into, let's say if I got into triathlon, then maybe that would have been it would have been not that hard to come off of swimming. But yeah, I think I do have this. I don't know if it's an ability, but definitely a trait that I do compartmentalize, and I do when I make decisions. I just don't want to dwell
Mm-hmm.
on that decision, and I can obviously miss something, but I don't want to spend my life just looking in the rearview mirror all the
Yeah.
time. So I kind of force myself to just always look forward.
Do you typically make decisions based on gut instinct and relatively quickly, or are you more of a methodical? Well, if somebody brings some information to you, or asks for you or a question, or you have a big decision to make, do you think about it for an extended period of time, or usually pretty quick?
That depends on what it is.
Yeah.
I use my gut for a lot of things when I know that the risks of making the wrong choice are
Yeah.
low. I can
Hmm.
always just change the decision, just involve myself. Maybe
Yeah.
should I do an Ironman or not, something like that.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
just I'll make that decision in a minute. If it's something that's really important that involves like risk taking and some decisions that either can't be undone or will be very difficult to reverse without pain, I do take my
Mm.
time. So I do start to go into slow thinking.
Yeah.
And but it's not like I will procrastinate. I
Yeah.
will just take my time to think
Yeah.
through all the pros
Process.
and cons and process it, and then I make the decision.
So, what is a decision that you are currently facing or have recently faced that is taking a lot of processing time?
I would say in my current job, there's always something that is requires a lot of processing time, and that's those are primarily strategic decisions that are obviously things that I can't disclose here, but
That's
I
a
mean,
bummer.
there's constantly crossroads, right, in as an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
where you have the product market fit. Of course, you get that. Then you're like, well, should we retool and do something, completely new with this product, targeting this new customer, or should we continue with the existing customer and go deeper? So there's some of those things that completely change how you allocate resources, and also carries risks that are somewhat irreversible, like once you're out there. So that there are multiple levels of those types of decisions every single day in my work. And it can be something as simple as pricing decisions that are still difficult to just crawl back from, to new product decisions, to your fundraising decisions, and so forth. So those are the big ones. And then in my personal life, I think there's some big decisions, but I think they're few and far between. Those are more things that I have fun with, and I'm okay jumping in and trying something new. And then I'm not too scared of something not going as I planned it, or failing, or that is secondary to me.
Yeah.
It's more the adventure. I sort of want to make sure that I'm not wasting my time.
Yeah. What is something that you fear?
I think so. So I definitely fear getting stuck in a pattern where I am only doing those things because I haven't self-reflected on why I'm doing them. So if I can't answer the why, I'm afraid of that. And then that comes back to, I just don't want to waste time.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I spent so many years, maybe early in my career, doing things where I wasn't really truly happy about what I was doing. And if I could jump in a time machine and go back and talk to myself in my early 20s, I would have said start a company as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But of course, maybe I wasn't ready. So that's also just a thought experiment. But I think that's probably what I'm most afraid of, is just not appreciating the value of time, and not to make you paranoid. That also doesn't work. But and you can't have grass greener all the time, so you have to kind of set a path for yourself.
Yeah.
But I do love questioning what I'm doing and going, well, why am I doing this again? At what cost? What are the alternatives? And then, oh, that's right. Okay, I'm on the right path.
Yeah. So many things I could ask. I'm trying to decide what is the best question. With your identity, it's obviously been related to a lot of different things. I wouldn't pin you. You seem like you've gone through life enough and have enough experience where you don't become overly attached with what you're doing, and you know who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. But I know so I'm 32. I don't have a ton of life experience, but with things that I've done in the past, startups, for it to be specific, I became very attached with them, and I think I'm still figuring out how to go into whatever the new project is, and it can even be triathlon, without becoming overly invested to a point to where if I was to not be able to do that thing anymore, it would kind of mess with my head. So for you, have you figured that out, like how to approach form your previous company, Recon Instruments, like the different things you've done? Have you been able to kind of sever those moments and move on well? Is that a good question?
Yeah, it's funny. I think when I was on my first startup, which was Recon Instruments there, it was before I got married and had kids, and that consumed me, and that became, what you read about when you're an entrepreneur the first time. You spend so much time, and it becomes
80-hour work weeks, no sleep.
You become the company, and the company becomes you. And I had great co-founders as well. And that completely changed actually when I met my now wife, and especially when we had our first child, and then eventually a second child, and then it became the opposite. It's just it's the family life was just what was the new startup almost.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy.
But also just in terms of, I guess, how I invest myself, and how I felt that I was applying myself, and also it was challenging. It's challenging to suddenly go from being, single, and I was 30. I was 37 before I got married,
Mm.
right? So I took my time, and so it was a big change, right? And then the startup and my businesses became more the fun part that I thought was low risk,
Mhm.
right? So it's kind of interesting. So that's that. If you talk about identity, that's kind of how I thought about it. So it wasn't when we sold Recon Instruments there to Intel in 2015. You know that was great, and I went straight into starting Forum. But it wasn't so much the destination with that defined me at all. It was actually the journey was just amazing, and that was,
Mm.
even if we hadn't sold, it would have been what I would look back on and be very proud of. Say that was
Yeah.
just a fantastic learning, and
Yeah.
and I was a little bit nostalgic about that. I realized when it was sold and I was inside Intel, which was also a great experience, but wasn't for me.
Mhm.
Um, I really craved like that challenge and getting back into startup like
Yeah.
almost the day after, and then
Yeah.
that's so hence
Yeah.
Forum happened.
Yeah. I don't want to disrespect as I ask this next question, I don't want to disrespect the tenacity and the ferocity that is required to do a startup well, especially. And I'm not super familiar with Recon Instruments, but I know with starting any company, like you said, you become the company becomes you. You're working really late hours. You're stressing over things probably throughout the night. You're waking up early. I mean, you're just doing everything you can to make sure that the lights stay on and then obviously make it a success. So you go through that journey. You've done that. Like you got it sold. You made the money. You can go start Form now. Now that you're in to Form, how many years has it been? 5, 6 years?
Eight almost. We're on
Eight
the
years.
eighth
Wow.
year. Yeah.
Okay. So you had that experience now being married and now children are in the picture. Which Dan is more efficient as a business leader, the one prior to marriage or one after marriage?
Oh, after marriage, after
Yeah.
kids, for sure. Like
Yeah.
by a factor 2 or 3.
Yeah, how so?
Yeah.
Tell me that. Give me that.
I think you just prioritize your time a lot better. I think
Mm,
you also become more empathetic. At least that happened to me. And when you're more empathetic, that actually, I think, makes you way more effective as a leader. You're better at empowering. I don't like to use the word delegating, because delegating, you're telling somebody to do something. You're just,
yeah,
empowering is like, hey, this is the problem.
yeah,
You obviously are great at what you do, so solve it, and let's work together if there's any issues. But I definitely think once you don't have, and it also comes back to how I manage my time. So I was made a deal with my wife, and that was mutual, that I would come back at 5:30 every day and have dinner with family every day, and I wouldn't
mm,
work evenings or weekends. So, and that's a really, and of course, sometimes I have to log in, but I would say 80, 90% of the time, I do not check email or log in on evenings, and definitely not weekends.
good for you.
And when you
That's great.
set that, it's funny because you almost think it's impossible to do, but if you did do that, if you do work those hours, you're burning the candles in both ends, and you start to become
Mm,
unsatisfied with yourself as a family person because you're not giving yourself enough of yourself there. And then those hours are also costly, right? Because you're probably tired if you've worked all day. So it's going to have an effect on the hours during the daytime, right? So you,
mm,
you only have so many productive hours in a day. And I think those hours become more productive when you shorten the time that you have available. It's just, I think it's called the law of Parkinson. If you said, like, take the time for a task, you cut that in half, you double your
mm,
productivity. So,
mm,
and that definitely happened to me. And you
yeah,
have to be at peace with it and understand, you know, don't let, perfect be the enemy of good enough is really what it is. Like, don't spend 80% of the time on the last 20%,
yeah,
because the learning and the iteration that comes in doing, that's actually the value, because you just get to the next data point, and then you can actually get much more done,
yeah.
um, if you have a mindset like that.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I've been trying to articulate um, a personal breakthrough that I've had of mine over the past several years from working in different projects and being in a few leadership positions and having the opportunity to, like you said, not necessarily delegate, but empower people to carry out things. And what I found was, as long as people are heard, if they feel heard, like and their issues are being heard, they're way more productive. And like 85% of the time, I feel like those individuals that are in charge of like boots on the ground, they solve most of the problems just by talking them out with you. and that really does cut back on the administrative hours that you have to do towards something. And I've found that, like you said, yeah, it's really interesting if you allot 30 minutes to a task that you probably could allot an hour to, but you're hyper efficient at like going after the task. I think that's something that needs to be talked about more, because in the American culture, it is very much like 40, 50 hours, like Forbes 30 under 30, work yourself to death, rah, rah, rah. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Now you're 50 and you have
Yep.
cancer and you're overweight and you're dying. So I'm glad you made $1 billion though. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
interesting. With Danish culture or European culture as a whole, like I have an Italian background. I don't know my Italian family very well, but I do know that and like, for example, my best friend, one of my best friends, he's Danish. He goes and visits every year. He did the Copenhagen Marathon. When he spends time with his family, it's like, well, we're gonna have like a legitimate formal dinner and maybe a lunch and like a morning whatever, and we go spend time on the beach. And there's a lot of these activities that aren't necessarily work related, but I think that they enrich that part of who we are to go and be hyper efficient when it is time to work, because you have like a higher stress tolerance or just a lower level of stress. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, those are two great cultures. So you're married into a Danish family. So you got that, in Denmark, you'd go typically, at least back, when I was working in Denmark, everybody would be in the office by 8 in the morning. But then the parking lot would be empty by 4.
Yeah.
And then, and you only do half an hour lunch and you eat with your colleagues at work.
Mhm.
You don't go out anywhere. And
I think it's a
so
good
you
thing. Yeah.
it's amazing, right? So, and then from 4 till, you pick up kids or whatever it is, you've got an hour and people go and do activities. They go on the soccer team or handball team or whatever it is that they do. So there is that balance. And I think that's important. And I am very, I guess, interested in sort of the Mediterranean lifestyle as well, as a counterbalance to that, where there's that notion of good food and relaxing
Hmm.
and the
Taking a
social
nap.
element, taking a nap if you have to, and just enjoying sort of life.
Yeah.
Right? It's not all about work or always go go go. It's just that slowing down. It really appeals to me. So
Yeah.
I think that can be difficult. I think here in North America in particular, but I think now increasingly in many places in the world, it's just everybody is getting paced, and at some point, you have to make sure that your kids are also at the same level as their peers, otherwise they're going to be left behind. So it's kind of
Hmm.
this weird game
Yeah, yeah, where
that
all
just
tides are
keeps
rising and we're all drowning.
it, exactly right. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's why I love going to the Mediterranean every year. We go there as a family, and you can just relax.
yeah,
And maybe it's not the most efficient service, and you can laugh at the size of the bathrooms and whatever thing you're used
yeah,
to in North America. But there is just like there's a reason why it's full of people from all over the world there, and
yeah,
just enjoying the lifestyle.
yeah. And I think that that part of the world tends to live longer as well. And I think it has something to do with just the pace of life. Like I was talking with a friend who recently went over there, and he was sharing, um, there's the local butcher, and then there's the local person that supplies this, and you have like a small ecosystem or a small economic engine for each little area. Which, in the U.S., it's like, I'm going to my Costco, I'm gonna get my Walmart this and supersize me that, and you have everything at your fingertips. But I think that it it feels good to go to multiple places and people to have those relationships, like with the butcher or with the baker. We
Hmm.
really have lost that. I mean, I've experienced it in smaller ways, because like my family lives here in Jellicoe, Tennessee. It's like population 5,000, so it's very
Yeah,
small. We don't have all those necessarily, but all those like butchers and bakers and stuff like that. But it is interesting. I think that getting back to that, if we could, would, I think, long term help the economy. It certainly wouldn't make it as fragile. Um, yeah.
yeah. And I think now we have the tools to probably do that more, with being able to work remotely, more flexibility in terms of startups and sort of the digital economy. So, I do think there's really no excuse for saying, okay, if that's important to you, then that's something that can definitely be done. Although, of course, in let's say your 20s, before you have a family, I think putting in the hours then to really get the momentum you need,
Hmm.
whether it's getting the degree or starting the first company or whatever it is, you have the
Yeah.
time. And if you don't use the time for that in those years, then,
Hmm.
but at the same time, I also traveled a lot in my 20s. So you also have to enjoy your 20s. That is
Yeah.
the golden decade where
Yeah.
you're, healthy and energetic and all that stuff. So don't waste that either. So of
Yeah.
course, if you just work 24/7 in your 20s, you're going to miss out as well. So there should be
Yeah.
balance there too.
Yeah, super fascinating. So I'm curious with the lifestyle that you do live, like you said, after 5:30 I'm done, weekends I'm off. Um, I guess one observation and maybe some questions. I know statistically that entrepreneurship and marriage statistically don't go super well together. A lot of the times it ends up with some kind of a divorce because it's really a struggle of two marriages. You're married to the business and married to your family. Which one do you choose? And sadly, I think the business wins in too many cases. In the
Yeah.
conversations that you have with fellow leaders in the spaces, just product tech, wearable tech, that kind of stuff, or the people that you interact with, do you find that it is a rare case that people share your values when it comes to work ethic and specifically with time and how you relate to the family?
Yes. Because I'm often asked the same question because I do see a lot of split ups and divorces. I think that happens everywhere, but definitely what you're saying is true. Like that there is a sacrifice there. And I guess I've been fortunate that I tend to really value like spare time because
Hmm.
it's what makes me efficient or effective as a leader when I am in my chair here.
Yeah.
And I've just always had that. I don't know if it's the introvert extrovert sort of personality split, but I just need to have that time
Yeah.
and to do something else. I can't just go all in all the time. I just get saturated.
Yeah.
So and I also think that I have a tendency to make commitments to myself before I get into trouble. So I kind of want to know, okay, I know where this is going, and so I make agreements with myself, and like I said, it's a competition kind of thing. It's like I will not, like there'll be maybe a few days where I have to be home at 6 instead of 5:30, but just being home at 6, that's a problem because that's
Hmm.
like, okay, was it worth it? Could I move it to a different date? Was it
Mm.
really that urgent? And sometimes it is, and sometimes you have to log in at night because you're talking to somebody in Australia or whatever.
Hmm.
But I still think that if you make those commitments and you stick to them, then and you live with them, then it will help you
Yeah.
because it is. I think, especially as you have kids, that it's just going to be really difficult if you're constantly putting them
Hmm.
in second place.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to make you feel miserable too over
Yeah.
time. And those, like I said, those hours, extra hours, you're probably not that efficient
Yeah.
in those hours anyway. So why do
Yeah.
them? Very
Yeah. I
costly.
think. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about the small disciplinary actions that we take, or the habits that um we form, and like, because so for me, I think one of the most impactful lessons I ever learned. I was in college, and I was how old was I? I was 20 years old. No, I was 19 years old. I was trying to figure out like how am I going to make it through life. I went through like kind of a crazy family upbringing, and I was trying to figure out what do I want to do. Anyway, I was about to go serve for a year overseas to help out with this like small medical clinic in the Philippines. And before I
Mm.
left, for whatever reason, like this was like the first time in my life when my mind was just blown wide open to trying to learn as much as I could, and anything that I kind of deemed good that I would try to apply that to myself. And I was walking to go eat at this burrito restaurant with these two girls. Um, One of them I liked. That's really relevant. But we were walking into this burrito store, and I was just observing her. And we walked past like some trash on the ground, and then she stopped. She turned around. She went back and picked it up. And I don't even remember what she said. It was something to the fact of like, oh, well, I thought about picking it up and I didn't, but I decided, no, I should probably go pick it up. And that really stuck with me because I was like, I thought to myself, that is probably the most like fundamental foundation of a character trait that I could apply to myself right now that is super simple. But I know that if I hold that mentality to go back, because we all have these things that hit our brain and we think, oh, maybe I should stop and say hi to that person, or oh, maybe I should pick up that trash, or whatever it is. But I realized for whatever reason that was like a powerful thing that if I applied to my life, then it would hopefully grow into something much bigger and more beautiful down the road. And so, kind of what you're saying with the family, like
Yeah.
that 30 minutes, because I did have one experience years and years later. with my wife's grandfather. He became very close to me and invested in one of my companies. And it was the day after Christmas. We were all standing outside, and like he had loaned me, or he had given me, I think it was like 15 grand, and didn't ask for anything in return. Like he asked some questions. I want to make sure I was being, as best stewardship wise with the money. But anyway, I ended up burning the money because of COVID, and I didn't know what I was doing and a number of other things. And I was gonna thank him that evening, and I was like, I'm gonna thank him so much for this. And I was like, when we were all in a circle together, we were talking, we were saying goodbye because we were leaving, and we were gonna see him tomorrow. I was like, oh, I'll tell him tomorrow. Well, he ended up dying that evening in a tragic,
Oh my
like,
goodness.
tractor accident. And I had thanked him in the past, but for whatever reason, like I felt like heavy on my heart in that evening, like that I should say something. And that hit, like that whole story arc from picking up the trash, the small things. I realized from that point on, like I am never going to take anything for granted. Like you said, 30 minutes. Sometimes things happen, but if I make the conscious choice not to tell someone something good or not to pick up that trash, you never know when you might or may or may not have that opportunity again. So that's why I really was relating with what you were saying. It's just like it's a powerful
Yeah.
thing. You never know what could happen.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I think, and it's maybe different, for different people, but once you find out, okay, well, this is, my value, or this is what I want to live by, then act on it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think once you started acting on it, then it becomes easier
Yeah.
to form a habit around it later on.
Yeah.
But it's that first time or second time, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's important.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely takes commitment. So, switching gears a little bit, why smart goggles? I mean, I know you like swimming, but where did this idea originate? When was the first time like, I think that maybe this is going to be a thing?
So it is actually interesting because when I moved to Australia back in, when was this, 2005, and I was 30 years old. I did an entrepreneurship course on an exchange program
Hmm.
while I was in Australia. I went on an exchange program to Canada. That's actually how I ended up here. So
Okay.
I thought I was going to stay in Australia, but that entrepreneurship program was in Canada, and I pitched the idea for this company for Form in class. That was the first thing you had to do. You had to pitch an idea, and
Mm-hmm.
then the most popular ideas became projects, and then you had to do a report. And as I stood up and we were told to pitch something we were passionate about, and so I thought, okay, swimming, what's cool in swimming? Literally just came up with that idea during lunch right before the lecture, and just scribbled it down on a piece of paper.
Wow. This was
And
before recon, then, like years before.
this was before. This was
Yeah. Yeah.
2006 at that time that I was on the exchange program in
Wow.
and the iPhone hadn't come out yet, and I had no idea how to do this or if it was
Yeah.
even possible. But we were told to just whatever, pitch something. So I pitched
Yeah.
this. I'm like, wouldn't it be nice if you could see information while you were swimming,
Mm.
like splits and heart rate? And then I stood up, and others, came over to me and said, "Hey, this sounds really cool." And we ended up forming a team, and then four of us out of six ended up starting that first company, Recon Instruments. And this ended up starting in swimming, but because it was too hard at the time, and we found some patents we thought were an issue, later turned out not to be. But
Mm-hmm.
we just kind of went, okay, why not? We got to pivot this, and we pivoted during the school project to skiing, because Olympics was in Vancouver in 2010, so 4 years
Oh yeah.
later. It's a big event. So we thought, okay, skiing is kind of similar, but bigger goggles, easy to integrate the technology, higher price point. You're already anchored around a lift ticket price, which is $100. So this
Mm-hmm.
would be a lot easier. And so that's what happened. And so that became Recon Instrument skiing, and later cycling. We had a pair of glasses for cycling too.
Oh,
And then coming back to foam was really full circle back to the original idea.
wow.
So that's why. So it wasn't so much why goggles. It was more started out for me as, okay, there was a problem, right? Didn't think too much about the solution. The problem is why can't I see metrics when I'm swimming? Or for skiing, why can't I see my phone or the lifts, on the resort map while
Mm-hmm.
I'm skiing, and I will have to stop and take off my gloves, and so sort of that access to information when you need it and you can't have it, And I thought, well, there is a solution for that. And then obviously for both skiing and for swimming, everybody wears goggles. So why not put the display in the goggles? It's kind of just logical solution.
Yeah.
But that's how it started.
Yeah, so you started Recon Instruments, and so it's a form of heads-up display in the goggle, correct?
Yeah, it's a heads-up display that's in the goggles. It's not see-through, so this was back in 2000. We launched the first product in 2010. We were actually the first consumer heads-up display in the world. So this is with a partner down in Colorado called Zeal, and we launched in partnership with them. They did the goggles, we did all the tech, and we did the app later. And then it was an opaque display that was inside the goggles where you had to look down, and you had originally buttons on the side, and you could then see, GPS in there, how fast you were going, your altitude, and we even had that jump feature, airtime feature, and all this stuff. And it was a really cool pair of goggles. We sold in two versions, $399, $499 for a pair of goggles, and we saw 80% of sales at the $499 price point. We thought, all right, there's something here. And then of course, we evolved the technology. We used Android, it became more modular, and we partnered with Oakley and Smith and Scott and all the eyewear brands. We're using our module, our technology.
What year did you partner with Oakley?
2012.
2012. I don't know if he was still there. Do you know Mike Parnell?
I've heard that name before, but I didn't engage with him.
Okay. So he was one of the co-founders of Oakley. One of my friends that I met randomly in the Philippines, we ended up living 9 months together. His dad was the co-founder with Jim starting Oakley. And so I think I don't remember when they sold to the Italians exactly, but I feel like it was around that time, but he was less involved. So I was just curious if you knew him.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I definitely have heard that name before. And of course, Jim is a legend there in the business. But I think they sold to Luxottica around just after we partnered with them. It would have been sometime in 2014 or something like that, I think, 14 or 15. But Oakley became our biggest customer. We actually went into the Apple stores with Oakley. We had cultivated that relationship with Apple, and we ended up farming it out to a couple of eyewear brands and said, okay, whoever comes first will get it. Of course, it was Oakley we wanted. Yeah. And then when we sold to Intel, guess what? Luxottica was the partner Intel was using for their, the products that they had on their roadmap. So again, I was basically back in the seat partnering with them. So that's so the technology there in the ski goggles, it was early stage, but it was also less visible for the observer because it was hidden inside this frame, inside the goggles here. So it made it not something that had stigma attached to it, like you saw with Google Glass later on. Like nobody really could see you were wearing a heads-up display in there, and you could ski and see how fast you were going and get text messages and track your buddies and see resort maps. We had GoPro video feed directly, so you could use it as a viewfinder, and we had a little apps ecosystem as well. So it was a really cool company ahead of its time in the sense that it was hard to scale truly because the form factor was still pretty large. To get it into eyewear, which we did try, and that was when Intel purchased us, it just wasn't ready. You can see even today it's not ready yet. So it's just a very tough nut to crack. We had a lot of fun with it, and was lucky enough to time the exit very well, and that was a great experience, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. So when did the military start knocking on your door?
Well, we tried to work with the military, really? and it was something that culturally was actually not that popular in the company. A lot of employees like, this is not something that we want to do, and we were dead set on, hey, this is something that will save lives, because sort of red on blue, or blue on blue fire, where you end up shooting your own people. That's unfortunately a very common problem. So that was one of the applications there. But we did work with both the U.S. Military and the Canadian military on projects, but that never became products. Oh, so, really? But we didn't spend a ton of resources on it. It was just something that we were trying to find product market fit, and we were looking industrial, outside of skiing, right? So skiing is very seasonal, and we were looking for something that we could use our technology for in other applications. So we went into, like I said, automotive, industrial. We were even building motorcycle helmet and trying to get that launched. And so we were really spending a lot of time in a very, I guess, it was focused in the sense that we had decided to be a platform, but it was also unfocused in that there was no chance that we could actually work on all of these different projects. We had to sort of pick a few projects.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So with Form now, I mean, obviously there came a point when you thought, okay, like this, we can fit this form factor inside of some swim goggles, and I'm assuming that came during the days of Recon. Is that correct or incorrect?
Yeah, during the days of Recon, given my passion, for swimming and how the whole thing started, I was always thinking, when could we potentially put this in swimming goggles? So I did have conversations with the big brands there. Is this something we can do? But that technology that we had developed, it was really too bulky. Like it was really something that could fit in a big sort of ski goggle format. It wasn't going to fit well in a swimming goggle, and there's just a whole host of problems after you've done that, where getting enough accuracy on the metrics so that it's completely automated. You don't have to fiddle around with buttons and all this stuff. That was a really, really, really hard problem to solve. And it was only after, selling to Intel there that, I was, after, I guess, 7 years of being in the space with that company, trying to launch products in so many different markets with partners, understanding different form factors, working, with different technologies and even display technologies. That's when I realized I thought that now was the time. Like I really thought the time. I was surprised nobody else had done it. That was actually what I was annoyed by. It's like, it's 2015 and nobody has launched a viable product that can give you information while you're swimming. I was just shocked. So I'm like, okay, it's still relevant. Let's go back. And so basically started working already on that project behind the scenes, because I maintained ownership of the IP in swimming, because there was never a product at Recon. So when we sold to Intel, that was carved out of the deal. So and that was on a full disclosure that I could work on that. So that was how the pivot happened between Recon Instruments and Form.
So that's super interesting. So whenever you started making it fit in goggles, I guess what is the first thing you even do? Like you just go to the drawing board, look at all the pieces, see if we can fit it inside a form factor that works okay on a face. Like what were your steps to like getting the first prototype to where we can actually go swim in these things and see if it works?
Well, my first thought was actually, I think the night of selling to Intel, I was sitting scribbling down on a piece of paper, and I thought, well, maybe there's a way to create a little sort of cylinder that can suction onto any swimming goggle. And then you look basically not sort of completely see-through, but you have enough field of view to see the surroundings and still also see the image inside that little cylinder there. So that was sort of the first thought of having something that was a retrofit.
Yeah.
And then that turned out okay. Well, it wouldn't look that cool, and it would probably be difficult to actually implement, making it stick on the surface, making sure that you could actually see the information properly. So then what I did was I called up a few of the principal architects from the Recon days that had left Recon before we sold to Intel.
Nice.
And so I was kind of fortunate that way, that I had 3 people there that I could rely on that had been part of the early days of Recon but were no longer there. So that started, we started prototyping and building a proof of concept. And so the first thing we looked at was just, okay, well, how would we create a see-through display? We realized it had to be see-through, and so it had to be in the line of sight. And that was very different from the technology stack we had at Recon. So we had to look at waveguides and how they work underwater. And we
what is a waveguide? I'm sorry.
So waveguide is basically the little, it's like a piece of plastic, for lack of a better word, that now sits inside the goggles, where the light from the display is directed into, and it bounces inside that little
to look like a hologram,
enclosure,
basically.
And then it hits a beam splitter at the end, which takes 50% of the, I guess, light from the surroundings and 50% of the light from the display, and then directs it to your eye. And then there's magnification happening as well, so you see that image as if it's, you have to refocus to see the information.
Yeah.
So but that means you can see through the goggles and see everything, and then your metrics are just like floating in front of you. And that's what we wanted to create. And so that was on the optics side. We had to validate that, and we found out very quickly by just taking a waveguide from, I think it was an industry application. I think it was from Epson, and we took it, put it underwater, and the whole thing was distorted underwater. And we thought, that's weird. Nobody's looked at this before, and there's no patents on it.
Mm-hmm.
So we realized that we had to patent that solution to this problem, which seemed kind of simple, but we had to go through this experience to actually find out how to solve that problem. Yeah. And then on the bulk side of things, we had to make sure that the whole package was not going to be too bulky, so that when you were pushing off from the wall, the goggles would just fall off your face.
Yeah.
And for that, I just took a normal pair of goggles, and we knew roughly the volume of the computer we needed, and I just super glued that piece on the side, and it was sort of sticking out. Mm-hmm. And then put fins on, went to the pool, and then tried to push off as hard as I could to see if they would fall off. I could feel it tugging, so I knew that we could do better, but it didn't fall off. Yeah. So I thought, okay, that we can do better than that, and so this is doable. Yeah. And then of course we started, and not knowing all the other problems that you also had to solve, machine learning being one of them, understanding how to automate the data tracking piece to a point where it's so accurate, because you're seeing the information in real time. So any error you'll see. Whereas with the watch, it's like it goes to the server, or you can easily, when you rest, it'll just like average out. Right. When you're seeing the data in real time, it has to be super responsive and accurate. That was very challenging to fix, to solve. Yeah.
So how'd you solve it? Who solved it?
Well, we were also lucky that there was that wave of machine learning talent that was suddenly coming into the space. Whereas before, you would write a code for every single scenario, line of code, and then you get stuck somewhere in a corner case, right, where you would not have something accurate. Machine learning allowed you to actually teach these algorithms, for lack of a better word, how to have a high probability of an accurate outcome. And we could do that by filming swimmers doing various things in the water, all the different strokes and different types of intervals and so forth, different types of people. And then pair that video using timestamps with the output from the sensors in the goggles. And then you could sort of teach the machine learning algorithms how, what freestyle was, and what breaststroke was, and what a rest could look like, and a finish and a start. And through that, you could get a very high level of accuracy if you've done your data collection and you've sampled information, this data from the right sort of type of swimmers. So you got sort of all the corner cases. Yeah. So that took years, right, to basically collect that information, label, and then develop the algorithms that were then used with the machine learning to ultimately reach a decision on, is this person resting or not? Is this person swimming? If this person is swimming, is it freestyle? If this person is turning, is it just a slow turn, or is it a rest? So what do you do if then you make the wrong decision? Can you reverse it? And so it became just a lot of these decision trees, and then building that into a robust model, and then continuing to improve on it. That was actually the most time-consuming part of this entire company.
The software piece, like building a model that just continues to get better based on all the data that's coming in every day from every swimmer.
Yeah, that took a long time.
I'm sure it took a lot of money.
And it took a lot of money too. Yeah, it took a lot of money too. Of course, the hardware costs more money because you have to invest in like tools, especially optics, and I mean the biggest expense in any startup, almost without exception, is always headcount. So that's you have to have a lot of different people. Excuse me. In a company like ours, where you're doing hardware and software and mobile software and firmware on the device and web, software. So there's a lot of different teams within the company that you have to spin up. And I've always been of the opinion that I want to be vertically integrated when it comes to the development. Like I don't work with, outsourcing stuff like components and important pieces and R&D to external parties. Yeah. Because it slows you down and makes you dependent on those people that you're not in control of that could leave. And so it's usually, it means that you then have to bear the burden of of these salaries.
Yeah.
And so you have to raise the funding to pay for that.
Yeah.
And that's what we did.
Yeah. Are you at a point now, or are you allowed to say that you're at a point now where like you're self-sufficient as a company where you can kind of sail on through?
Yeah, we are self-sufficient.
That's awesome.
As a company.
Yeah. How does that feel to be able to say that? I mean, I don't know when that happened exactly, but
it happened actually this year.
Wow.
And yeah, it was quite the journey. And it feels really good.
Yeah.
And it's funny, it's taken 15 years of being an entrepreneur to get to this point. But, 2 companies.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, right? Sometimes, you can be profitable earlier, and then you're not going to make as big an impact, right? So you can decide if you want to be profitable. I've always decided it was not the time to be profitable. It was the time to raise funding, to build this ecosystem, whatever it is we wanted to build first. And then once you've got good unit economics and you've proven out your product market fit and all that stuff, then you start raising capital to bridge to the profitability. But you have to understand what mode you're in.
Yeah.
Because it's quite easy to be profitable if you set your ambitions low enough.
Yeah.
Right. But for us, for our business, I think just the way everything's come together with our product in the swim market, with our that we're focusing a lot on triathlon and really working very methodically on our strategy and our playbook. And it has been very, very fulfilling to sort of reap the fruits of that focus.
Yeah.
So you can easily get distracted.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So just a couple more questions because we're running out of time, sadly. But for you, where does Forum need to land for it to be like, or has it already landed at a place where you feel that, okay, this is what I set out to do, product-wise, team-wise, the whole culture-wise? What needs to happen to get to that point to where you say like, okay, this is it, like we made it?
Yeah, do you know what? When I first started scribbling on the business plan on my own there back in 2015, I was looking at, okay, we got to be the best tracker out there because you're real time, and also if you're introducing a new category of products, you have to be better than the alternatives, even at what they're good at. And then I wanted to also have an ability to finally show, like, be able to guide swimmers and show workouts, because that's something that, again, you have to memorize or bring a piece of paper and it gets wet and all that stuff. It didn't make any sense to me. And then I always thought the holy grail was to be able to coach in real time using sensors in the goggles. And, thought it was going to be 20 years out or whatever. I didn't know how long it would take. Thought it was just going to be initially, canned text messages, like, remember to, put your head down and all that stuff. Yeah. But the fact that we're now covering all three, with our product now, where we actually are doing and using machine learning for coaching and highly individualized, personalized plans. We got thousands of workouts. We even auto-generate workouts just for you.
Yeah.
So I should think, okay, it's, job done. We're here. And the funny thing is, it's almost like this is the beginning now, because now you've got this platform, and now, you've got our estimated mates are around 150 million active pool swimmers in the world, 31 million in the US alone. So we're just scratching the surface. So how do we use our IP and our platform? How do we use that to really take on the industry and become, mainstream? I think my vision is that nobody should say, are they smart goggles? It's like they're goggles. It's almost like your phone is, of course, it's a smartphone. There's no feature phones anymore. So why would there not be a computer and a display in a swimming goggle when otherwise you can't get the information you need? So that's sort of what I'm really focused on. And so there's always something new after you achieve the milestone.
There's so many things I want to ask. So I would hopefully in the future get to have you on again. We'll see if we can make that work. But for my last question for you, something that really stood out to me again, and we talked about it, was you having a successful company, but also a successful family. I think that in a lot of ways, a successful family is like one of the most difficult things to do with the society that we do find ourselves in. So I would love to hear some advice from you, or just some things that you've learned for how to be successful at entrepreneurship and at being a father and a husband.
Yeah, I don't have the answer for everyone, and I'm not sure I'm at the end of the learning on
Hmm.
that part. I think for me, learning was definitely to learn how to slow down
Mm.
and just be present. I mean, it may sound like a cliche, but it's really hard to do for an entrepreneur because you're always living in the future. You're always like, oh, 3 years we're going to do this, and you talk to investors and your team, and so that's kind of what defines entrepreneurs. You're really excited about the future and what you can do,
Yeah.
and you're constantly thinking about problems. And I was definitely doing that early on, and I think it's so precious to have kids and a family, and having that be your first priority. That's the first thing. You
Mm.
have to just like not say, I'm going to fit in this and pretend that it's my first priority. If you want to be successful with family, it has to be your first priority. So every decision you make must be serving that priority.
Mm.
Right? And that means taking vacations, coming home, having dinner and spending weekends. And then when you're there, it's not just the time spent,
Yeah.
right? It's the quality of
Quality.
time.
Mm.
So I constantly, I'm still working on that. I constantly catch myself in not being present in the moment because there's maybe something that I'm thinking about. And so your kids can keep you honest there,
Mm.
where they pick it up. So I would say that that's the one thing I do think that would probably resonate with a lot of people, that you have maybe, I wouldn't say stressful, but a demanding, career, is that switching between those two modes can be very difficult.
Mm.
So that would be my advice would be to just be present,
Yeah. Slow
stay in the
down and be
moment, stop
present.
thinking about all the other stuff that is happening in the future. It's not relevant right now.
Yeah. Maybe we can all study the Danish culture a little bit because I feel like that has to have some part to play in it, like the value of family. So everybody go read a Danish book or go visit, go
go
visit Denmark.
go visit in the summer,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is July.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe there's something to that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to answer some of the questions. I feel like we only scratched the surface, but I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. And I guess, yeah, just thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful dinner with your family this evening.
Thank you very much. Likewise, and this was a lot of fun. Thanks for all the great questions, and have an amazing trip to New Zealand.
Thank you.
That's I'm jealous. That's an amazing spot.
Thanks, man.
Have fun.
Thank you so much to Dan for coming on the podcast today and letting me take some time from his super busy schedule, obviously, and just hearing about the different things that he has going on. Super inspiring dude. Obviously, he has had some good success. Just so excited, actually, really, to hear that he's able to now form into a sustainable company where he is making a profit and innovating at the same time. That is not an easy thing to do. I've never done it yet. Hopefully, someday I'll be able to tell the same story. But yeah, in asking him for some advice on how to make entrepreneurship and marriage, or really just any relationship, work when it comes to business, I think that this advice could carry across many different facets of life. He said basically to slow down and be present. I think there's a lot of truth in that and a lot we can learn from it. So slow down and be present. If you made it to this point in the podcast, just want to say thank you so much. Really appreciate you listening, watching, and wherever that is. If you could like, comment, subscribe, review, comment. I think I already said that. Anything that you can do to help share this by upping our engagement stats, liking, all those things. I'll quit rambling. If you could do that, it would be really awesome. If you also want to sign up for our newsletter, you can do so at the stupidquestions.show website and check out the link in the description. We'll probably have something there for form as well. All right, guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one.